So I'll run through who we've got here. So we've got Elspeth Beard. Elspeth was the first British woman to ride around the world on a motorcycle. Lone rider, very, very famous rider these days, Elspeth. And we're going to be chatting about riding back in the 80s. I've got Simon and Lisa Thomas. They've been riding around the world for 17 years, I think it is now, or 16, 17 years. Racked up, God knows how many miles, 500,000 miles or something like that. Non-stop adventures. So loads of thoughts. And then we've got Steph Jeavons, first person to ride on all 7 continents while circumnavigating the globe. And everyone who's been on the Armchair will know loads about Steph because she's been on a few times before. And today she's coming to us from her Christmas grotto, it seems. You're looking good over there, Steph. I'm really liking that. Yeah, so welcome, guys. Thanks for coming on. We'll get straight to it, Reece, shall we?
I think so, yeah. So I want to say, as I said already, guys, if you've got any questions for the panel, we've got the feed, type them in, we'll try and answer them as we go. We've got about 40 minutes here. I'll be a greedy goose and kick it off because I can. And I'll go straight to you, Elspeth, I think. So let's go straight back to then, I suppose. Traveling in the 80s. I mean, what was it like, I suppose, traveling back then and trying to drive around the world on a motorcycle?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we all travel in the time that we are used to, that we know. And actually, when I left on my trip in 1982, I can remember thinking how lucky I was to have a bike that should actually get me around the world, and how lucky I was to be able to have sort of reasonable bike gear that was sort of vaguely waterproof and was sort of warm. And so we're all get used to what we know, and I mean, obviously now traveling is very different to what it was then, but I'm actually very glad that I traveled when I did. I actually think of the 1980s as a sort of golden age for traveling. I think it was at a time where the bikes or the cars or however you were doing it overland had actually reached a stage where they were reasonably reliable, and you could actually have faith that your bike, if you serviced it and looked after it and maintained it, and you probably have to fix it several times along the way, but at least it was probably the first time you had the confidence that you had a bike that could get you around the world relatively easily. But also it was at a time before all the technology had taken over our lives. And so I certainly felt at the time that I was going out almost like an explorer. I mean, the world seemed a much larger place because you couldn't even find maps for some of the countries. You couldn't find out anything about them, about traveling through them. So you were really venturing out into the sort of unknown. And I think that's what I really sort of enjoyed about it. It made it very sort of intense. And also it was the feeling that you were very much alone. I mean, you didn't have a safety net, and you had to rely entirely on yourself. If your bike broke down or anything happened, you had to rely on yourself. You couldn't, I mean, there would be several months that I was on the road and nobody in the world knew where I was. And that was actually really nice. And that was actually partly the reason why I traveled. I traveled to escape. And I think the thought now of traveling where kind of everybody knows where you are all the time, I don't think it's something I could kind of quite cope with. For me, I wanted to be alone. I didn't want people to know where I was. I didn't want people to be able to, to find me or contact me. And this would be for months at a time. I mean, not just a few days or whatever. I mean, months and months and months at a time. And it was great. It was really great.
Awesome. Well, I suppose, yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting, really. It's a good point. You can go months and no one knows where you are. I suppose, Steph, you've travelled more recently, and you definitely can't go, I imagine, months without someone known. But I guess in some ways it is quite nice as well, isn't it? Because you can keep in touch with family and whatnot, and you can, in this sort of like connected world now, you can have a blog and share the trip with people, especially something like what you did, which is 7 continents whilst driving around the world, and keeping in touch is probably like quite a key thing, would you say?
Yeah, I don't think I'd have got 7 continents without that technology to help me along the way. And I think that's the thing is, it is definitely different kind of travel these days, although the basics are still the same. And funny enough, when I read Elspeth's book, I remember kind of reading through some of the countries and going, oh God, that sounds exactly the same. It's quite bizarre how some things, so attitudes even can be quite similar, or so it is quite interesting to compare. There definitely is a difference, but I think the basics, the foundations are the same. In some cases, it might be more difficult to cross certain borders today than it was then, and in other areas, so it evolves all the time. I think exactly like Elspeth said, you're a product of your trip is a product of the time you are, so you don't miss what you never had. Like in 20 years time, it'll be completely different again, but we've been traveling for hundreds of thousands of years across continents and venturing out to places, and then of course we use the technology we have to push boundaries as we go. And yeah, I think for me, sometimes the technology, again, like Elspeth said, was a bit of a burden. You just wanted to be able to, well, you could switch off, but occasionally, the word would spread. Like in certain countries, the word spread from biker group to biker group, and I felt like I was getting handed from one place from one group to the next, and that was definitely the whole Facebook era thing, Steph's coming through, and there'd be people waiting for me at junctions. I'm like, wow, and that was great because I got to meet some really cool people that way. Lots of free T-shirts, lots of biker T-shirts, biker club T-shirts. But yeah, very, very different, and yet a lot of similarities.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's very relative in any sort of, like you said, it's what wherever at that time sort of thing. So you can only almost deal with the cards that you've been dealt in many ways in that sort of scenario. Simon, Lisa, I suppose you guys are the closest to people who have been traveling so long ago, sort of 17 years ago, and you've kind of watched this wave of like social media take over things like adventuring. How do you sort of think it's developed over the years since you first set off?
Well, when we first set off, there was no Facebook, there was no Skype, so you couldn't keep in contact with people as you can now. And I actually loved it. I really did.
That's why you were smiling at Elspeth's comments.
I loved it. We would disappear. We disappeared through Africa, but people just didn't know where we were. And in fact, that's one of the things, and we didn't want people to know. And that is actually, in a way, how we still like to operate. There was this tracking where you can put where you are at the moment. What's it called? Spot track. Yeah. And we had that up on our website for a short period of time. We took it down because we had what happened to Steph happen to us all the time, and that's not what we wanted.
It's just that it's lovely to be met by groups. You have lots of opportunities. The wave of enthusiasm, it can be addictive, but at the same time, the British especially, we're very polite, and when someone offers you hospitality, we tend to accept them. We go along, and the more you do that, the more you end up veering off what you had planned, and your trip suddenly becomes somebody else's. That hospitality once in a blue moon is lovely. It's appreciated. It's fantastic. But it can get to a point where it starts being a double-edged sword, and you just start taking the easy, comfortable route as opposed to doing what you wanted to do, was really get off the beaten track and find out about the world and who you are.
We've actually been accused, and if they're listening, they will know who they are, of going dark. Simon, Lisa, you go dark and you disappear and you don't let anybody know where you are. And we go, yeah.
Definitely, and that's how you like it.
But I think that's the beauty of the technology is you can turn it off whenever you want, and so you don't have to. I know exactly what you mean about the spot tracker. that is an, you know, if people can just check in at any point and zoom in and pinpoint where you are, that's too on. You know, you need to have that sort of, okay, there's the switch, turn it off and disappear. And I think it is nice to have that combination of things.
Yeah,
but also,
sorry.
Also, it does give you a safety net. So if you ever do find you're in any kind of serious trouble, you do have that. But yeah, it is nice to be able to switch off and head off into the whatever.
Elspeth, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, I mean, I've often been asked, you know, whether if I was doing a trip now, would I do it with all the technology, or would I try and do it the way that I did it before? And there've been various discussions about it, and I was speaking to somebody, and they were saying, well, actually, they tried to do it without the, you know, the technology, and the problem is because everybody else is using it. Everybody else is, you know, using it to book all the hotels, to book all the places all along the way. So if you just roll into a town or something, you can't find anywhere to stay because everybody's already booked it all up on using the internet.
That's why you have a tent, Elspeth.
I know, but you know, I'm just, well, okay, but I'm just using that as an example and some way to say, whatever you want to do, everybody's booked it all up months in advance, and it's really hard now to travel in. I mean, I know you can ride up to a mountain top, and you can, you know, stay there for months on end and vanish from the planet, but that's not, but you know, if you want to actually move and travel, it's quite hard, I think, to do it without a certain level of technology.
I think it's important. We speak to a lot of travelers, or a lot of would-be travelers who have been planning a journey, or they're thinking about heading off. And I think it's very easy, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. It's very easy to look on all the websites. There's more people traveling today than there ever has been, to look at what they're using in terms of technology and go, well, I've got to have that, that, and that, as opposed to sitting back and going, okay, first of all, why am I traveling? And then secondly, if you consider each of these pieces of technology as tools, because that's all they are.
Yeah.
What do I want to achieve with each tool? Because it's so easy to get encumbered and bogged down and actually overwhelmed from a tech standpoint, because there is so much tech available with so many suggested benefits versus, okay, if you go out and you want to travel and you want to make a name for yourself, and your intention is to use your travel as a vehicle to make a name for yourself, you've got sponsors, then you are going to unquestionably have to share your journey in a very immediate fashion and take advantage. But if, like Lisa and myself, you set out initially just to go and travel, then that tech isn't necessary other than the safety stuff in terms of something where, okay, shit goes sideways, I need help. Perhaps a social media page so you can share when you want to. But it's important to work out what you want to do and then look at what is the minimal amount of tech I need to allow me to do that.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not sure how many people actually set out purely to make a name for themselves. I think that's something that comes from a necessity, like if, you know, like you said, if you've got sponsors, you kind of have to, you know, you have to put you have to do your blog, or you have to do your social media stuff, but that can be put into your box of, okay, this is my social media time, this is, and again, you've got control of that. So I think we talk about it, we're in danger sometimes of talking about it as if it's a terrible thing, like, oh, you know, she's just doing it, or he's just doing it for the likes, and I think that it's finding that balance, isn't it? Because of course we've all got, if you were just going out there doing it for the likes, then it's you're not going to last very long, because it's not going to, you know,
I think there is the problem though of letting the social media and everything like that take over your journey. And it's very important to take a step back, take time out. Hence just going dark for periods of time. You don't want it to rule your journey. Oh, I've got to go up here because this will make a great shot and a great piece on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. it shouldn't dictate your journey, and it shouldn't dictate who you meet, who you talk to. Not everything needs to be recorded.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember when I was in the States, we were fixing the bike. I was using my phone light as the torch. We pushed the bike onto the phone, it cracked the phone. And for the next couple of days when I didn't have a phone or anything, it was just bliss. So Reece, do the social media. I was just having a cup of coffee, just enjoying the area. And it's just, it's so nice. Yeah. So it's interesting, guys, all that tech stuff. But I guess it's not just tech that's changed in this time. It's not just the internet. The world has changed too. I mean, we were chatting to Simon and Lisa the other day about routes and things. And we drove from Cairo to Cape Town, and we were on tarmac the whole way in RCD scooter and sidecar. I mean, it's very different for you guys when you did it, Simon and Lisa, wasn't it?
Well, we were talking. This happened a couple of years ago, but it's the same story. We were talking about going across the Sahara, which for Lisa and I was a really big deal because we had no skills, didn't know what we were doing. We went in pretty blind, I think, looking back now. And we had 4 of the most challenging days, sand dunes, the whole 9 yards. And we were talking to this guy a couple of years ago about our experience and blah, blah, blah.
You're wondering, this is the route from Nouadhibou to Nouakchott. So we're on the
Morocco
side.
Down to the capital of Mauritania. It's the old Dakar route. And we were talking about how difficult it was and challenging. And the guy said, yeah, no, didn't find it that bad. No.
And we're like, wow, you must be a good rider.
Your
That's
sand
great.
skills are good.
Yeah.
He said, what do you mean sand skills? I've got on the road. There was suddenly a vast road there that just connected the two. And although that's fantastic if you try to travel really quickly, it's a bit like the Route of 40. There are some really important legendary routes that are legendary because the rewards are there, because the challenges are as well. And there are certain routes that are becoming tarmac, a lot of the Silk Road now, a lot of Route of 40. And I think in some ways that obviously as an infrastructure, that's going to be fantastic. If you live there, people can move that more freely, commerce, etc. But at the same time, it's important that we should enjoy more challenging terrain.
Yeah. The thing is as well, I mean, you're right. I do think as well you can still get that sort of sense of like those timeless moments, if you like. But we said we did take the tarmac route, probably because if we'd gone off in the sand dunes, we wouldn't have made it at all. But I do remember a time, for example, when we were in Sudan, and you go into a random village and everyone looks like they haven't left their village for hundreds of years, but they do have Facebook somehow. So there's that side creeping in. But you can also do the thing of going camp in the middle of nowhere in Sudan, light a fire, and all you can hear is the farmer walking home singing. And that's like, that must have been what happened with Elspeth, must have been what happened 50 years before that. So it's sort of like you still do get those sort of things even now. And even with like social media stuff, I mean, I don't know, for me, when we used and sort of like met up with people or biker groups, I maybe I was wrong, but I kind of thought it's quite an easy in to understand people's cultures and that sort of stuff because they want to show you it. But
yeah, definitely. I think we have noticed over the course of the years. I think it's fair to say that our opinion is that traveling has become a little more challenging, more bureaucratic, and more expensive. I think Elspeth is absolutely correct that the golden age was the 80s. You could do it. There was some guidelines. There was a way, but there wasn't as much bureaucracy.
Well, we've noticed it in the years on the road, the increasing bureaucracy,
which is money.
the increasing complications with computer systems being brought in, and countries now being able to talk to one another, pass information through, especially in North America. We've had a few mishaps there with that.
More bureaucracy, more
bureaucracy,
fines, more money. What do you think, Steph? I mean, did you find that whilst you were on the road that things got noticeably more challenging, more expensive?
Not really. In the 4 years that I was on the road, I don't think there was a massive difference. But I think definitely if you compare it, to 20 years ago but things are evolving all the time, of course, like I said, and it is getting harder to go and find that quiet space, but it's definitely still there. You know, it's not all bad news. There's some great adventures to be had. I mean, even in your own country, right? Like I always sort of promote Wales and say, there's adventure on my doorstep. It's just there. It's such a beautiful country, and there is everywhere you go if you go and look for it.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Wales have never been into the mountains, you know, and you think, well, what are you complaining about? You've got it on your doorstep. If you want adventure, you'll find it, and it's actually quite easy to find if you've got the right mindset, I think. Oh, it's stunning, yeah. So, but border crossing and stuff again, you know, it just evolves and changes, and it's never a static thing, is it? The bureaucracy. So,
but also, I think a lot of these countries now, the fact that more and more people are traveling, they do see it as an opportunity to extract as much money as they can out of these people passing through their country. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's, you know, it's just, but, you know, in the 2.5 years that I was on the road, I only met one other overland motorcyclist.
Right. Wow.
Because people just didn't, one other, and fortunately we met, and we traveled together from India back through Pakistan and Iran and back home. But you know, and he had been on the road for like a year, and by that stage he'd been on the road for nearly 1.5 years. He hadn't met a single other person traveling on a motorbike.
Wow.
And I met one person. And so, you know, when I arrived at a border crossing, it was like everybody, all these guards would just kind of stop and go, what is this? And so, and they were like really friendly, and they would kind of really try and help me, and they were really interested in my bike and what I was doing, you know, sometimes a bit over interested. You know, so it was very different because there was, you know, like they probably had like 2 bikers going through in a year or 6 months or something. So like now, I don't know, I think there are a lot more people obviously riding around the world and doing trips all over the place, which is fantastic. But it does change their attitude towards people who are traveling and people who come to their borders.
Yeah.
I think it also changes the attitude between travellers, because one of the big things that we've always commented on over the last little while, in the first 4 or 5 years on the road, likewise, 2003 we set off, it was pretty unusual. And if you passed another person who was clearly travelling on a bike, both hands would shoot up, you'd wave, you'd stop, you'd come back, you'd have a chat, you'd talk about who's what.
You talk about it because, and I think this is the change, because you're going where he's been, and vice versa.
But so today, there's no waving at all, almost no acknowledgement. Today, we actually notice that when another rider puts their hands up or even stops, that is the rarity.
Wow.
Now you can kind of pass like that and you carry on, and Simon and I are slowing down going,
are they going to turn and say hello, and we'll have a chat and find out where they're going? And
you guys need a steering sidecar. Everyone stops for that. So.
Yeah, I've got to say that's not my experience either. I've got to say, like, even through borders, I found people were still behaving as if I was the first person ever to come through on a motorbike, you know, and that always, I'm like, well, surely, you know, I'm not the first, and you know, but and I found attitudes people were always still quite surprised to see me for some reason, and actually I found it quite different with other travelers too. Like I've done U-turns to in fact I've seen 4 of you guys on the road as well, haven't I? but actually, no, I found it still really friendly, and apart from Harley riders, sorry, could I say that?
We still found people were friendly, and I mean, that's why we travelled. In fact, that was the reason. You meet people. There was still that buzz. There was still that, oh, you're something new. The motorcycles, the sidecar are this wonderful opening to conversations. At the same time, we did notice that over the course of the 16 years, the number of people that would wave and stop just declined.
Yeah.
Didn't mean it went away, or that the enthusiasm that we would meet and the conversations weren't wonderfully friendly.
I think that is because people are getting their information online a lot more easier than they are by face-to-face communication. So those are travelers as well. So they're able to just log on, what's up the road, is anything going on, how's this border, etc., as opposed to going, hey, you've just come through that border. How was it? Any issues? So I do think that is, we've noticed that change in
It might be something that people may have taken for granted a bit more. I don't know. I mean, Elspeth, you've sort of touched upon it, that, you know, that when you travel was like a perfect time to travel. And I've been asked before if you would travel now. Is there anything in particular that does attract you to sort of traveling in this sort of the 2020 sort of time? Well, not including COVID, obviously.
No, I mean, I'm not anti-technology at all. And I think if I was doing a trip now, I would definitely take a phone. I don't think I'd take a smartphone. I would just take an old Nokia that, you know, I could use in an emergency, that the bloody battery lasts for 2 or 3 weeks because it doesn't have all these fancy features on it. And I'm not spending my life trying to charge it up everywhere and getting to a panic because it only lasts for 12 hours or whatever. So I take an old Nokia phone and I would take a very basic GPS as well. But I would still take a map and I would still use it.
Oh yeah.
Well, maps are great, aren't they? I mean, even with the GPS, I always carry a map just because I like to, not just for the romantic feel of it, but also because you can. It's practical. You can open it up. You can get a little highlighter, and you can
You have to because you have. Or I like to see where I am in the whole picture. I don't want to live in screen with a.
What you got to do is that, guys. Just zoom it out.
I know, but you use all the detail. But a map has got so much detail. You can see the rivers and the gorges and the trees and all the the lines or whatever to see. It's brilliant. Maps are so fantastic.
Yeah, I will always get a map of. Well, I always carry a map of the world as well, but I always carry a map of the full country, and then I will carry a map of the region. And then if I can get a more localized map, I will do that as well. I love my paper maps. I have to have them. Without it,
but that is a romantic thing, like Steph said.
Yeah.
You are an old romantic, but you can also, if you stop.
Well, it's not being romantic, it's being very practical.
Yes, of course, it's scary face.
It's very practical to have a map there.
But it is, I was going to go on to the practical side. When you're trying to get directions from somebody or trying to get an idea as to where you are, opening up a map, they'll actually look at it and they'll, okay, well, there's a mountain over there. Yeah, you're here. Trying to do that on a tiny little phone with your gloves on, and it's freezing cold, and you can't feel your hand. You're trying to scroll, and you keep going to your emails. Having a map is wonderful, almost essential.
And the battery doesn't die on a map, on a paper map, does it?
But also on a map, you can see little places where you can see, like a village, and it's all kind of on the edge of a river or something. And you think, God, that looks like a really interesting place to go and see. And so I used to find all sorts of places just by looking at the map. And just looking at whether they had, like churches or temples or big buildings or whatever. And that's where I'd go to. And that's what I saw from the map.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by this, guys, if I'm honest. I'm convinced by I can see the romantic side of it, but I've got to tell you, you can see all that on a map on a phone. You just got to...
No.
It's the same thing.
No.
It's the same thing. I need to come over and deal with you, all right? I'm gonna when COVID is over, I'm going to come and stay in your living room, and I'm going to show the advantages of using a map.
Okay.
But guys,
trouble.
One of the best things about maps, though, is that they set your expectations for the day, and then they give you adventures when you realise that the big red line that says there's a road definitely there isn't.
Yeah.
Isn't there. They were going to put one in, but it's just suddenly there's your adventure for today, trying to get from here to there.
Also, if you just want to kind of head in the general direction, you kind of look at the map and go, oh yeah, this kind of looks good over here. Like Elspeth said, oh look, if we can get here, that looks like it might be interesting.
Exactly.
Whereas if you've just got a small screen like this, you don't know what, because you've got to go scroll.
Well, as you zoom out, you get less detail.
Yeah, and you're like, nah.
You miss stuff.
Yeah, okay. This is something for boot camp, guys.
Maps will never let you down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they do add to the mystery. Definitely add to the mystery, which is part of the fun of it. Certainly. I mean, what I would say, obviously, is that if you're worried, if you are concerned about battery for your phones, guys, you can get one of those things you plug into your bike these days. It's just a thought. There's no right or wrong.
Too much stuff.
Guys,
more
one of them, Tom Ferry, he mentioned, we talked about touched upon bureaucracy and that sort of stuff. And I mean, we mentioned, Steph said, you still get that excitement when you reach a border, but equally there are more people now traveling. Do you think it becomes harder as a result? There's so many tourists these days. Like, Elspeth, when you were going, it was, you said you only saw one other overland motorcyclist, but Simon, Lisa, do you think it's got harder over the past 15 years to cross borders and that sort of stuff, or not really?
I don't. It depends what you call harder. It has become more expensive in as much as there are a lot of countries in South America, for example, you don't need a kind of passage. You can apply for the visa, the transit visa on the border. And we've noticed that, the $30 or $40 per visa back in 2006 is now suddenly $80 to $100 per visa. Things get a little bit more complicated. New computer systems get brought in. We went through the border with Nicaragua the very first time, and we were the very first people to actually use the system on the very first day their system went live with the fingerprinting. We were at the border for 3 hours purely because they couldn't find the identifier for the UK. Normally it's UK or GB.
Right.
3 hours we were there for no other reason than they couldn't find the UK on the computer system.
Right.
So that made it harder. But it depends country by country. It depends certainly, continent by continent. There isn't a hard and fast rule.
And I also think it does depend a lot on how other travelers or other tourists, depending on how you want to categorize it, if you do, have behaved at that border. It is a very popular border. I'm trying to be very politically correct here, but
that's not you.
I'll just say what I normally say. If somebody has really messed it up for you, and they've happen to be on a motorcycle and they're a foreigner, they can make it really, really hard. Whereas many borders that we've crossed before, especially going through West Africa and up through South America in the earlier years, we only met 5 other travelers in South America on motorcycles when we were there. So you've not got the, how can I put it, contamination at the borders. So I think it really does depend on how the border officials have been treated by other foreigners.
Yeah.
I crossed some borders and I would get there and they actually didn't know how to deal with me. They didn't know what the carnet was. I had to tell them where to stamp it and which piece of paper to tear off and what to write. And because they had never actually dealt with somebody importing a motorbike temporarily into their country, and they just didn't have a clue how to deal with it. So it was very different from now, I'm sure.
It does actually still happen today, believe it or not. It's just like, how can this actually still be happening? You must have had somebody through before. What's going on?
Yeah, I think they're probably on their coffee break at that time that person came through. We've had it constantly too. But there are certain countries where I now you guys obviously you don't have this option or the choice. And in fact, it does annoy me sometimes, a lot of the time, all the time. In the fact that as I'm there with Simon, I'm the one that deals with the paperwork at the borders, etc., etc. But if there's a man there, they will always direct the questions, etc., to Simon. And he'll always go, okay, Lisa, what are you going to do? A lot of countries
I didn't say, what are we going to do?
Yes, you do.
Simon,
Always.
sir, where are you going? Let me just check. Lisa, where are we going? We're going here. Okay, well, when did you leave? Let me check. Lisa, when did you leave? Yeah. They just walk past me, forgets me, goes straight to the horse's mouth, because I'm useless.
I remember what I was saying, man. What point was I trying to make?
Simon, you're useless.
Yes, Simon, you're useless.
But, has this changed the way, as a lone female motorcyclist, do you think that has changed between the 80s and the 2000s in terms of your experience, Steph and Elspeth?
Well, I personally think I'm surprised. I think it has changed, yes, but it surprises me more. I would have thought it would have changed more than it has. But having read your book, Elspeth, and comparing it to my own journey, I'm surprised, regardless of technology and all that kind of thing, I'm surprised at how similar, it really surprised me how similar it is in the sense of attitude and experiences and things that happened and things that were said. It's just like, wow, in some instances, scenarios, it's like no time has passed at all. And in one way, that's a nice thing. And in another way, it's just like, crikey, really? Are we still doing this? But I think misogyny in certain countries is still definitely a thing, although sometimes it's your friend, sometimes it's, oh, you want to change my oil? That's fine. You can do that. Or, you want to feed me? Oh, great. Yeah, lovely. And a lot of the time you have to kind of explain, look, I did get here on my own in the first place. I don't need looking after. But, it's generally meant in a nice way, 95% of the time. But yeah, what do you think, Elspeth?
Yeah, I think, I certainly felt, certain countries where when I arrived, and because a lot of, in certain places, I don't think, they'd never even seen a motorbike like mine, before, and let alone a woman riding it. And I think it was almost just total, they couldn't actually, understand what it was they were seeing. This kind of strange thing that had almost dropped from outer space. There was this kind of extraordinary motorbike that was just, 10 times larger than any other bike that they'd ever seen, and then it was being ridden by a woman. And so I had a lot of people looking at me in a very curious way, almost wanting to touch me to see if I was real, so
you have that effect, Elspeth.
Do I? All right, very good.
Got yourself lucky.
So so I don't know, but I think in an odd way that was something that I felt sort of protected me and made me feel, because a lot of people say to me, oh, it must have been really dangerous and you must have been really kind of frightened traveling on your own. And sure, there were risks and whatever, but I did have this kind of slight aura of being, because they'd never seen anything like it before.
Yeah.
That I was just this complete extraordinary thing that they just couldn't understand, and so they were quite wary of it, and so they'd all kind of take a step back a little bit and move out of my way, and so, and that I think was was actually a real sort of advantage at the time.
For sure.
I think the element of surprise always is, in the sense of that, they're like so shocked and surprised that they don't know what to do for the better or for the worse. So it's a bit like a distraction. So,
and you have to decide whether it's worth taking your helmet off or not, or whether it's better just to keep it on.
Yeah. For sure. Well, guys,
I've had a few issues. Just the last very funny one, you have to do it.
The helmet on-off thing has just made her giggle. We're by the side of the road. I'm fixing Lisa's bike. It's freezing. We've got cars going past us. We've both got our helmets on. And
they were the flip-top ones of those days.
And at the end of it, I went over and Lisa was tired, and I gave her a hug and I gave her a nice smooch. And as the cars were going past, like I think it was South America, there were horns and there was shouting, there was everything else. Bearing in mind that, again, going back to your point, a woman on a motorcycle, all everybody saw was the big gay biker kissing their head at a little bloke gay biker. That's all they saw. That was the presumption. That was what horns and the shouting was about.
Really? Wow. Pretty crazy.